Hello and welcome YouTube. I am your host Americles. Today is going to be a slightly different format. No memes, sadly, just me talking into a microphone, completely unscripted, because it needs to be timely. So I came across this very interesting and tasty document, found it on one of the Facebook groups I'm part of. This here is a complaint filed by Attorney General Maura Healey of Massachusetts against the defendants, the New England Institute of Art, which I myself actually attended, and Education Management Corporation, the parent company of NEIA here. And so I am not a lawyer, but in order to help me understand what the significance of this document is, I did consult with one of my friends who is a lawyer. And he explained to me that a complaint, in essence, is a request to the state court to basically serve the defendants this lawsuit. So it is the first such step in an actual lawsuit, which is very good news. So a bit of background, our Attorney General, Maura Healey, has been investigating this school and its parent company for many years now. And in fact, they even contacted me at some point, and they were very nice. They asked me some questions, mostly regarding their recruitment practices, which is what this document is all about. So I am not going to read all of it, but I will just try to bring up some of the highlights here. Obviously, this is a big step, and the next step, I believe this clerk magistrate, the court, will actually serve the defendants the papers saying, yep, you are now under a lawsuit and you are going to be asked to appear in front of court. And anyone here is more than welcome to correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not a lawyer. Don't take this as gospel. So the complaint is being filed under the Mass Consumer Protection Act, which basically says anyone engage in unfair or deceptive acts, actively targeting, aggressively recruiting prospective students by misrepresenting in-field job placement rates. So a bit of background on that. AI had this terrible tendency to inflate job statistics, where they would, boast about their students being employed at grand places such as Apple and Bose, and they would call those as in-field employment, even though it had absolutely nothing to do with in-field employment, because if you dig deeper and you ask them, well, what are those students doing there? They'll tell you, oh, they're a genius at the Apple Store, or they are doing tech support, answering phone calls at Bose. So absolutely fuck all to do with the degree they just spent $80,000, $100,000 for. So all bullshit. And then they would go on to inflate salary numbers, and we'll get to that later. So, interesting here. The Massachusetts Commonwealth is seeking civil damages in the form of restitution, including a refund to students of all unfairly or deceptively procured tuition and or fees, civil penalties of $5,000 per violation. Very nice. It is basically detailing all the transgressions of NEIA and EDMC here, saying, nearly all NEIA students incurred substantial debt. A vast majority of student loans are backed by the federal government, which is what she is probably pursuing. The costs of default, as in if you are a student and you're paying your loans and you can no longer pay your loans go into default, they are not borne by NEIA and EDMC, but ultimately by students and taxpayers. Indeed. Former NEIA students in contact with the Attorney General office have freely expressed their anger and frustration. For example, 2011 graduate of NEIA's Audio and Media Technology Bachelor's Program reports feeling scammed and cheated, adding, "I feel like a prisoner to my six-figure debt." Six-figure debt at 22 years of age. Sadly, that's very common for this school. Graduate of NEIA's Photography Associates program reports being initially intrigued by the school's high statistics of job placement post-graduation, but added that these statistics turned out to be grossly exaggerated. Quote, "It became very clear very quickly that my field did not even necessarily require a degree, and that outside of starting my own business, not an interest of mine, my options were extremely limited. This place was a crock. My 20-year-old self was manipulated by grandiose promises that were nothing but lies. I'm now the owner of a $60,000 piece of paper." So they go to explain what the statutes are and how they protect the public. Let's keep going here. In May 2015, NEIA was announced that it was cease enrollment and would close the school after doing a teach-out. A teach-out being, they maybe do it online or, basically lead the remainder of the students to graduation, and then they close their doors. A bit of history here. Here are a statement of facts. This is very strong language. They are presenting this as facts, meaning they have ample evidence to prove that this was the case. So again, this is a bit of history, more history and context. Let's talk about, prior to closing, NEIA offered associates and bachelor's degrees, tuition averaging $49,000 for NEIA's 2-year program versus $95,000 for its 4-year program, exclusive of room and board or cost of living. Yikes. Blah, blah, blah. Majority paying with federal loans. Let me skip over all this. Oh, here we go. According to defendants, the average debt load for NEI graduates between 2009 and 2012 was over $53,000 and does not include amounts owed directly to NEIA. So NEIA, in some cases, I believe, was acting as the lender, and they charged interest and levied fees, basically almost like a predatory loan or a same-day loan. Approved now. I need money and I need it now. So here, the complaint alleges the unfair and or deceptive. So starting from here, the complaint begins to allege the unfair or deceptive practices in the recruitment and enrollment of students. So basically, when they would come up to you during, like, say, a high school recruitment event, and you share them just a tiny bit of your dreams, like, I think I want to be an artist. They're like, oh, we have wonderful programs, and boy, do you need a degree. You sure look like you need a degree. We will give you a degree, and there's a bazillion jobs waiting for you at the art factory when you graduate, and you'll make all the money in the world. Basically, that. Aggressive sales tactics. So technically, aggressive sales tactics, particularly where a company compensates its recruiters for numbers, is an illegal practice. Here they outline kind of how they skirted this rule in law. The beginning of the admissions process involved a prospective student speaking with a recruiter who self-identified as the assistant director of admissions, ADA, a tactic which was meant to conceal the fact that the prospective student was actually only speaking with the recruiter, right? Sounds like a big deal, assistant director of admissions, and this is like a high up position, you would think, but nope. This person's only job is to get you in the door, not to actually screen you and figure out whether you're a good fit for the school. It also says here, it also deceived prospective employees. One former ADA believed he was applying for a job as the assistant director of admissions, was surprised to learn that there were at least 20 other people who held the same title. Each ADA had to meet weekly quotas with respect to phone calls made, appointments scheduled, and students enrolled. ADAs who did not meet their quotas were ultimately terminated. Again, this is technically illegal, but they kind of have created this odd position here and basically pretended like, no, not a deceptive recruiting practice. Nothing going on here. Here, the complaint outlines how ruthless the recruiters were once they sunk their claws into you. These are quotes probably from students. Once they have your information, they are ruthless. They called a little excessively, like there was some rush to sign up. The process was quick with getting loan money, and I was offered pre-acceptance in order to start sooner. I received calls every day since the open house to apply now. This happened for more than a month. Rather than focus on prospective students with a stated interest in NEIA's programs, recruiters were indiscriminate. Internal EDMC documents show that of the individuals who ultimately spoke to an ADA, only 5% understood the difference between specialized and traditional education, knew about NEIA's particular programs, or even expressed an interest in higher education. So they didn't care if you wanted to go to college or you didn't, whether it was right fit for you, and whether this was a career you should pursue. No one gave a shit. Let's sign you up and let's get that sweet money rolling in. $20,000 a year. Let's go, baby. We gotta get paid. They chased down every possible lead, no matter the source and no matter how obtained. They purchased consumer information from online and other lead generators. They would also generate leads by asking prospective students if they knew anyone who might be interested in NEIA. I can definitely attest to this statement. They definitely asked me to sell out my friends. And sell out I did. I did almost managed to sell one of my friends down the river. Luckily, this friend was smarter than I was and didn't wind up going to the school. Here's an absolutely shocking statement. In order to prevent prospective students from canceling once an application was submitted, EDMC required ADAs or recruiters to call the students the very next day, keep the dream alive, keep in contact on a regular basis, and invite them to lock-in events. So fucking creepy. But it works. When you're 18 years old and they are playing upon your, or I should say preying upon your dreams, it works. It goes on to describe the pressure and how quickly you can go from I don't know if I want to go to college to, oh shit, I'm literally sitting in a classroom and I'm $20,000 poor now. So, and here is where it begins getting spicier and spicier and just downright ridiculous. So the misrepresentations, like I said, they would tout, oh, our students get the best jobs, the greatest jobs, and they get the biggest money for salary. Here's the truth behind all those statements. One student reported, I was foolishly recruited by some admissions counselor who made me think I was qualified to get in, when in reality they accept anyone who has money or a heartbeat. This is true. Even if you shouldn't even be in college because you have no studious aptitude, they didn't give a shit. Sign you up. All right, so here is how they misrepresented the acceptance rate. The acceptance rate being what percentage of applicants to the school they actually let in. Now, at the time when most of us went here, these are the numbers that were given to us. A number that was publicly available to prospective students ranged from 42.9% to 27.6% between fiscal years 2010 and 2013. However, when its accreditor expressed concerns about declining enrollment, NEIA explained in a 2012 report to the accreditor that its true acceptance rate during this period increased from 96.4% in fiscal year 2010 to 100% in fiscal year 2013. So, no, They weren't letting in 1 out of 4 students like a decent college would. They were accepting everyone. This is the most ridiculous number I've ever seen. 100% acceptance rate. You could be the dumbest, most untalented person in the world, and you would have absolutely no chance of ever succeeding in the field, and they would say, "Nope, sign you up. You will definitely be successful." Quote, here's how they explained the acceptance rate. This is New England Institute of Art. "For our purposes, we do not consider a student to be accepted until they have completed financial aid packaging. As a result of using that definition, we have a low acceptance rate and an extremely high enrollment rate. We have substituted the figures for a more traditional definition of acceptance, academic acceptance by the admissions committee of the faculty. This shows a more accurate picture of a high acceptance rate and a moderate enrollment rate." That's interesting. You're basically a nobody. Basically, you're a nobody to them until you can get that sweet financial aid and pay them. There's a high attrition rate, meaning since 2010, more than 60% of students who enrolled in NAIA did not complete their selected program. So not only were they accepting anyone and everyone, so long as they had money, of course, a majority never got the degree. So these poor 60% got the debt and not even a worthless piece, let's say piece of paper to show for it. Here we are getting to their the statistics and how they compiled jobs data. For example, they tell you here that the 2010 placement statistics brochure provided to prospective students states that career services will help you pursue full-time work after graduation. It also required the ADAs to read the job placement statistics verbatim from a brochure produced by EDMC, but neither the brochures nor the ADAs disclosed that the school statistics included part-time jobs. So they would say, yeah, 90% of our students are graduated or 90% of our graduates have jobs in field, and they would call them full-time jobs, or they would completely omit that part of that piece of information. So you could be working part-time at Dunkin' Donuts, and they would probably include that. All right, here we get to the meat. In brochures and on its website, NEIA claimed its overall job placement rate for 2010 graduates was over 89%, with rates in individual programs as high as 98% for audio and media technology. But these rates were misleading and designed to lure students into enrolling at NEIA. To start, the rates included part-time jobs, when students were left with the impression that NEIA was designed to secure them full-time employment. The rates also include jobs unrelated to the graduate's field of study. Thus, in reality, the school's placement rates for in-field full-time non-temporary employment range from just 26% to 60% in 5 of its programs. So you can see how if you are a prospective student and they tell you, yo, 98% job placement rate, don't even worry about it. You're practically guaranteed a job out of this program. And then reality sets in that there's basically a 26% chance of you even getting anything in field. 26% of use. Insane. So here's how they collected the so-called statistic on job placement. They're calculated based on information obtained by career service advisors, or CSAs. Defendants required CSAs at NEI to confirm graduate employment by obtaining written or verbal employment verification from employers or graduates. CSAs were required by EDMC to obtain verification of the placed graduate's job title, duties, and the hours the graduate worked. This is technically not a bad thing. If they literally or actually contacted your employer and asked, hey, is this person working here? And the employer said, yes, and here's how many hours they work. That would be nice, but that's not what happened, as they go on to tell you in this complaint. For example, inflated placement statistics. They falsely represented the existence of a job with an employer despite evidence the student was not so employed, falsified job titles, counted jobs that were not in the student's field of study, counted short-term jobs as permanent, overestimated students' earnings, used incorrect verification forms, and counted job graduates held before graduating from or even enrolling in NEIA. So if you worked as a clerk somewhere before you even went to the school, they would count that as, yep, that's a job that our graduates hold after going to NEIA. This is a job that you can get, and this is how much money you get, and this is how many hours you work. Totally full-time, totally legitimate. So here is the standard they used to count whether or not a job actually was in field. EDMC directed CSAs to count as placed any graduate working in a job as long as the graduate was using 25% of the core skills learned in the graduate's program for 25% of the time in his or her employment. This is a very loaded statement. Let's try to deconstruct it a little. So, okay, you go to school, let's say for, I don't know, video production. And as part of the degree, they taught you how to use a computer, 25%. And if a quarter of the time at your job you use a computer, then they say, yes, you are employed in field. You totally have a job in the degree that you went to school for. They did not consider it relevant whether the graduate's degree was necessary to obtain the job. As a result of this low standard prescribed by parent company EDMC, CSAs counted customer service, retail, and administrative positions as placements. So if 25% of the time they taught you how to use a computer, then you went on to work at Burger King, where you have to use that a screen, a point of service machine to enter in orders. They say, oh, yep, you use a computer. We taught you how to use computers. Therefore, employed in field. EDMC also directed CSAs to count short-term jobs as permanent as well as overestimate graduates' earnings in such jobs. So here's where it gets really interesting. A graduate is considered employed as long as the graduate worked at least one day. No additional days on their job are required as long as the grad went to a job that fit their skill level. So you go work at McDonald's and work for a day and then you get fired the next day. They counted that job as a permanent position. Interesting. Here's where it gets absolutely insane. So remember how I said, the school gives you a brochure when you first sign up, and in it are included statistics for every degree program they offer, and it'll tell you how much you are expected to make as an annual median salary, and also what percentage of graduates are employed in field. Here is how they obtained those numbers there at the end, and they usually sounded fairly decent for a starting salary like $30,000, say, for example. They would actually extrapolate a salary from an hourly wage. So in one such instance, a 2010 graphic design graduate was offered a temporary contract position with a wage of $15 an hour on a contract not to exceed $3,000. NEIA nevertheless annualized the reported wages to $31,250, which is what you would make if you actually worked for $15 an hour for 40 hours a week year round. That's the number, but it was a contract position, therefore it was maybe for like a month or two, and that's it. But they counted it anyways, and they extrapolated this number, which looks nice on paper. And that's how they deceived students. It's called annualizing the reported wages, creating the appearance that these graduates obtained permanent rather than short-term employment, therefore falsely inflating the 2010 placement rates. Remember earlier I mentioned that it would be nice if they indeed got written employment verification, But in deposition testimony, former president and director of career services John Lay stated it was preferable to obtain employment verification from employers because students were known to be unreliable and often exaggerated the details of their own employment. This is probably true. If you're in a position where you had just finished 4 years of schooling and you have spent an insane amount of money on doing it, any job you get afterwards, in order to save your own ego and to protect your mind from the fact that you just made a colossal error in judgment, you will tend to start exaggerating any old job that you got. Like, you'll basically fall into the trap and have like a sort of Stockholm syndrome of sorts. Like, your job might totally suck, not be in field, but you will stretch the truth in order to protect your ego. That's what it comes down to. And yet, I'll continue. And yet, the overwhelming majority of employment verifications forms were, at least purportedly, completed by students. Former CSA Amanda Lobdell confirmed that if she first obtained verification from a graduate, she did not attempt to confirm any of the employment details with the employer. NEIA knew that the information on most of the forms for these and other reasons discussed below unreliable. Nevertheless, defendants used this info not to ensure that graduates were employed in related and sustainable jobs, but instead to create the appearance that they were so employed for the purposes of inflating placement rates to recruit prospective students. The information NEIA recorded was unreliable for a few reasons. In few instances, or in some instances, despite what a graduate reported, the CSA manipulated enough of the info, provided either verbally or in writing, to record a graduate as a placement. For instance, a graduate from the graphic design program self-reported on his verification form that he was working as an intern for Disney. The CSA inexplicably reported that the graduate was employed as a graphic designer when in reality he was working in guest transportation. So not only was this person an intern, but they also basically made him drive a bus. So you were an intern bus driver, and yet they extrapolated that, no, you actually are a graphic designer and you work in field full time. Insane misrepresentation. Talk about stretching the truth. My God, they earn a medal, definitely. In a review of 161 student-signed employment verification forms for 2010 graduates, almost 40% had been substantively completed by CSAs. This process allowed CSAs to exaggerate or fabricate information to purportedly meet the employment verification standards under EDMC's procedures. Basically, at the end, when you graduated and you were working something, anything, probably not in field, they would come to you, you would sit down in a one-on-one meeting with the CSA, and they would present you with these forms, and they would basically ask you questions like, are you in field? How much money do you make? How many hours do you work? And the problem with that is that it's all exaggerated, and at times CSAs would make shit up, and as it says here, nearly 40% had been completed by the CSA, so you don't know what they're writing down. The job might not be in the field, but they are, quote-unquote, stretching the truth in order to make it appear like you're employed in field. Here's some evidence of their practices, of how this job statistic collection would go. For example, a graduate from the interior design program stated in an email to a CSA that while she was still working at a retail store where she'd been employed for 5 years prior to graduating, she was looking for in-field employment and asked the CSA to forward her job leads. In notes accompanying the verification form, the CSA recorded, however, that the graduate is, quote, open to looking at jobs, but is not in a huge rush since she likes her current position and is well compensated. The CSA purposely misrepresented the contents of the graduate's email and completed the verification form herself. Because the graduate had previously signed the form in blank, it created the appearance that the graduate was verifying that she had obtained in-field employment when she was actually still looking for a job. The graduate was reported by defendants as an in-field placement. So literally, she was working at a retail store. She was working at, say, the mall, and she asked the CSA, find me a job. And then the CSA says, no, she's actually happy working where she is. And she happens to be working in field. And bing, that shows up as a job placement statistic. Another example. And another one. When they could not obtain or fabricate a verification resulting in a placement, CSAs tried to have the graduates confirm details of their employment as being even tangentially related to the field. One former CSA explained in an email to a graduate seeking placement assistance, I only have until the end of this month to work with April grads, not a lot of time to find you something, so I'd like to account for you in another way. The CSA proceeded to ask the graduate whether any of her job responsibilities at a framing shop where she'd been working for at least a year were related to design, even though the student graduated from the Media, Arts, and Animation program. I'm guessing framing shop being like a wood framing shop? So, yeah, not exactly related. But this would be a case where I see we taught you how to browse the internet in our Internet 101 class, and I see here that you browse the internet occasionally at your job. So, in-field, graduated, in-field placement, no problems here. They then use those insane job placement rates to lure the next round of students. Quote, NEIA used their job statistics as a selling point that convinced us we'd be able to afford the loan payments. The enrollment process was them preaching about the 100% job placement rate they had and the charts of how much I could make to start in the industry. These were huge reasons I joined NEIA, and it was a complete lie. Here's something really damning. The goal of career services was to verify the employment of as many graduates as possible, no matter if the job was unrelated or unsustainable, for the purpose of representing high placement rates to recruit prospective students, rather than actually fucking finding people jobs. They were busy inflating numbers. Here they begin to talk about misrepresenting how much the school would cost. For example, they would tell you, EDMC stated in its training materials that there are a limited number of institutional scholarships. Defendants often refer to scholarship opportunities in marketing materials. They were provided with an application for the merit-based scholarship, despite that such scholarships were limited in availability. So they come to you and you say, well, is it going to be expensive? They say, don't worry about it. It'll all be financed. And on top of everything, we have scholarships. And you know you're going to be the best and brightest, so you're totally going to get it. Even though that's all bullshit and maybe only a handful of people managed to get those scholarships. And personally, I did receive this so-called scholarship at times. It was for, if I recall correctly, it was a $500 tuition reduction for the semester, provided you made it to the dean's list. And I don't know if too many people made it to the dean's list, whether everyone got that tuition reduction or not, but I don't know. It was there. I just do have doubts on how many students were actually able to get it. And actually, compared to the $90,000 they're charging, $500 is a droplet of piss in a piss ocean. It doesn't really impact your ability to pay for this at all. They go on to say the defendants knew that the education was not affordable for most of its students, whereas explained above, half of the borrowers who left NEIA between 2009 and 2010 were in default, deferment, or forbearance on their federal loans. When marketing to prospective students and convincing them they would find a way to pay for school, NEIA and EDMC failed to tell them about the staggering default and non-payment rates. Literally half of the borrowers were either in default, deferment, or forbearance on their federal loans. Deferment is not necessarily a bad thing. It can mean any number of things, such as you went back to school or you had some kind of, situation. There's lots of reasons for deferment. It's not necessarily a bad thing. But default is pretty much non-payment, and that is That's not something you can defend. Defendants also routinely overbilled students for incorrect tuition amounts, including charging students for more credit hours in a semester than the number of hours from which they were in fact enrolled. A review of 196 student financial plan projections provided by NEIA to students, 87 contained incorrect tuition amounts, so almost 50% include false tuition amounts. And I personally remember this being the case. Sometimes a note would come, a mail piece of letter would come to my door, and they were demanding more money, even though I had literally just finished financing the semester. All of a sudden, an extra charge appears, and almost every time I would dispute the charge and ask them, what the fuck is this charge for? And they would relent and say, oh, no, just a mistake, honest mistake, no worries. But, quote, while some students report that they noticed discrepancies and had their bills corrected, those who did not have been overcharged by the school and have been forced to bear the additional cost as part of their ongoing debt. In other words, these so-called mistakes were never corrected, and they were only corrected if you called them out for it. Otherwise, they charged you extra. So here, the complaint details the causes of action. They're basically saying, yep, NEIA and EDMC made false and misleading representations to Massachusetts consumers. They inflated job placement rates. They misled people about what sort of placement services they had to begin with. They concealed the true cost of attendance, and they made material omissions. And because the defendants were paid tuition and fees by reason of their unfair or deceptive acts or practices causing harm to Massachusetts, that is basically the whole reason behind this complaint, that this is illegitimate and ill-gotten money that they received from students because they bullshitted basically everything there was to lie about. Here they kind of reiterate what exactly they violate. This must be actual law or rules. And here, finally, here's the juiciest part. The Commonwealth requests that this court order defendants to fix damages in the form of full and complete restitution to former NEIA students, including but not limited to repayment of all amounts paid by such students to NEIA, comprising tuition and fees. Order defendants to pay the Commonwealth civil penalties of $5,000 for each separate violation, as well as its reasonable attorney's fees and costs incurred in the investigation and prosecution of this lawsuit. Order defendants to cease the pursuit and collection of outstanding student loans and grant such other and further relief as this court deems just and proper. Signed, Maura Healey, Attorney General of the Commonwealth of Mass. And that's pretty much the end of the document. So I only have really a few thoughts and concerns here. I mean, this is music to my ears as someone who attended the art institutes, and I too feel like everything in here is on point. Thinking back to those days, the very first days when I was 18 and those recruiters came to my high school and they really laid it on thick about how I'm fantastic and how I'm going to do great. And then these unexplained charges and being able to receive fuck all for a job. And then I went to work completely outside the field, and I'm sure they took that number and they said, nope. Americles went on to work in the field and made this amount of money. So this is all on point. The only problem I see with this is, first of all, NEIA, the school is closed. I mean, the building doesn't even remain. So I'm not sure who they're suing exactly or who they are going to serve at NEIA. I would expect maybe the president named in this complaint, maybe some directors, that's possible, maybe even some CSAs. But again, NEIA is gone, and EDMC, the parent company, they just recently filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy, which is not a restructuring. It is actually a bankruptcy where they just say, yep, we're closing our doors forever, and to all the creditors and debtors out there, fuck you. We don't owe you anything because there's no money. And the article I read said that EDMC itself only has $50,000 left in assets, and they have well over $500 million in liabilities. There was a long list of creditors looking to get some money out of the bankruptcy. So I feel like we're, like the 34th in line here to try to collect from EDMC. So who are we collecting from? What money is there even to collect from? Maybe if they can prove that at the executive level, maybe a CEO directed this and is directly implicated in this, maybe then we can fleece them personally. But I have strong doubts as to whether this case here will ever, not just see the light of day, or if it does, what's the point? Maybe it is to set a precedent. My lawyer friend tells me that civil cases cannot incur jail time. So I don't see what can possibly happen here. There's no money, and no one can really go to jail. They might even say that, yep, guilty is charged, but no jail time and no money. Maybe the court will say from here that there's nothing to collect on, so they will throw out the complaint. That's what I think will happen. I hope not, and I hope that there's some magical stash of money out there that is waiting to be dispersed to former students, but I don't see it happening. I just don't. I'm sorry to be such a Debbie Downer, but again, I'm extremely curious about what will happen here, and I look forward to it. So I hope this has been entertaining. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed watching. Please like and subscribe if you didn't. Thank you.